hopefully those answer the questions. And we'll just keep moving on into now diving into a couple of specific examples of how the type of metric I've just shown you can be used or has been used by two different companies. The first one is Playworld Systems. Playworld is a leading manufacturer of playground equipment. And to illustrate here, about 90% of their emissions are in Scope 3, that is in the materials that they use to build the playground equipment. About 10% is in their manufacturing processes and painting and construction of the playgrounds. And we did not, as I mentioned, in this case, measure Scope 4, the use of the playground, which is actually a very, very low carbon emission. So the first thing we did for Playworld was to look at what is the largest impact across their enterprise. In this case, steel and plastic were their largest sources, along with aluminum. So they are focusing strategically on material substitution and replacement, process redesign, and product redesign, focused on those particular components. They're also looking at aluminum recycling, heavier use of recycled products, and they're, from a cultural and human perspective, looking at their Scope 1 as well and implementing programs across the enterprise. To give a notion of sort of helping with and why materiality is so important, they were looking at recycling paint, and the impact of paint going into the landfill from a toxics perspective is very high, but as you can see from a CO2 perspective, driving a few extra miles to recycle the paint is a nominal impact. So we avoided a carbon analysis, and they are recycling 100% of their paint waste and paint that's not used. Probably from a strategic perspective, the biggest impact they're having is more along the lines of carbon labeling products. This has become part of their business process. They sell to principally to cities, and as many of you may know, 900 cities in the United States signed on to the Kyoto protocols, so carbon is an important part of their focus. And they're now marketing and working with their clients, looking at cost, functionality, and carbon footprint of every product that they sell. And it's really shifted the conversation and made them viewed as a leader, and is impacting revenues for the company in a very positive way. So what have they achieved so far, if we want to just sort of go back and summarize the achievements? First of all, their competition is reporting Scope 1 and 2, so they're reporting a very small piece of their carbon footprint. That was a challenge for them initially, trying to decide if they would report their supply chain emissions. They decided that that was the right thing to do, and it's turned out to be strategic for them. And it did involve training their sales force on how to discuss Scope 1, 2, and 3, but the customers have responded very positively to their broader look at carbon. And of course, it's helped them move more product. They've also created a new framework for decision making, or I like to say a new lens for decision making. It's impacted every part of their business. They're looking at, as I mentioned, material replacement. They're looking at product redesign into the future using carbon data. They're looking at their manufacturing processes and making much more sophisticated trade-offs now over energy efficiency as well as cost and competitiveness in the future.
And Chris, is there anything that you can say in terms of revenue growth, in terms of cost reduction, or anything related to tax refunds or rebates?
Most of the initial impact has been in revenue increases, and Of course, it's a combination of changing the conversation with the client and beginning to discuss aspects of their product that their competition is not, and of course, other. So I think quantifying precisely would be both not appropriate from a confidentiality perspective, and it's also a subjective measure. From a cost perspective, they did suffer a year ago when steel prices soared, and as a result, they are redesigning and rethinking business processes around steel. But the results of that are not yet in their financials, though I think they'll show up as we start to see carbon increase over the next year or two.
And is there anything around the buyer's criteria where they've integrated sustainability into how they weight that in their purchasing decision?
At this point, what they've indicated is that their customers have responded very positively to understanding the carbon impact as well as the cost and capabilities of the playgrounds. So it's become a factor in their decision making, but not the only factor. I mean, I think just like with other somewhat subjective factors like quality, carbon is being integrated into the decision process of buyers around the world.
And then one more question from the audience. In the paint example, how do you avoid creating a single focus on carbon versus balancing it with toxicity that may not be included in the greenhouse gas accounting?
That's a great question. In the case of Playworld, their focus initially is on carbon, but they're looking at sustainability broadly. They know that paint is a toxic substance, and the residues that they use in their powder painting can be toxic and needs to stay out of the landfill. I think the case we showed where there is a trade-off between carbon and toxins, but it's a really clear trade-off, right? Directly poisoning the water and putting toxins into the landfill just doesn't make any sense at all. And for a nominal increase in carbon output, that trade-off was an easy business trade-off for them to make, and in fact, they did make it.
And one more question. Do LCAs, meaning life cycle analysis, generate the data that shows steel and plastic having the largest CO2 impact of the products?
Yes. In this case, the analysis that was done used the standard or sort of the baseline Climate Earth database called CEDA, the Comprehensive Environmental Data Archive. It's a database that has been peer-reviewed internationally, is used by the EPA and the EU for policy-level decision-making. And it gives us very good guidelines as to what the high impacts are. In fact, in the case of Playworld, the results we produced were so substantial that these impacts were such a huge part of Playworld's impact that they didn't feel it was necessary for us to go work with suppliers. They just began the work to study recycled plastics for their performance characteristics, sun resistance, color fastness, and well as began looking at other ways to reduce their steel consumption as well. In the case of WebCore, which I'm going to be talking about in a minute, we have gone to their suppliers to begin to differentiate suppliers on WebCore's behalf based on the carbon intensity of materials used in the construction process.